Yo, what's up? Welcome back to another episode of the SWUS. It is officially the Natty National Championship time, Miami, Indiana. Real quick, this season, ton of fun. Those of you that take the time out of your day to watch the videos and support the channel can never thank you enough. Eternally grateful. Thank you for the support. Let's have one last ride here. Miami, Indiana. Let's do it. I mean, is Cooper Rush worth 2.5 points? I would hope Quinn Ewers put up a decent stat line against Arizona State. If he didn't, we have a real problem.
You can say the same thing about Creighton. Okay, they had the one good game against Kansas at home.
When Toast talks about the kicking market, it's like some earth is flat shit. Andy, true or false, this is going to be a dog walking.
Dog walking. This is my dog walking of the day. I think it's going to be very ugly.
Dog walking.
I think this is going to be ugly.
Hey, get the sauce. All right, national championship, Miami, Indiana. This one's been all over the place. Pinnacle opened this one up at 7.5. Look at this chart. 7.5, 8.5, 8, 8.5, 9.5. So at 20K limits, it did get as high as 9.5. Since then, it looks like most of the movements have been consistently towards the Miami side. We're actually back down to 7.5, which is where we started, and we're currently at 40K limits. Let's take a look at Juice Reel. So it looks like it was, in terms of the most profitable bettors on the app, slightly leaning towards the Miami side, anything 8 or higher. So anything 8 or higher, 59% of the most profitable bettors on the app taking Miami. At 7.5, though, 65% of the most profitable bettors on the app taking Indiana. So it looks like buying on Miami 8 or higher, buying on Indiana at 7.5. In terms of the total, it was actually 48.5, and it came down to 47.5. But according to Juice Reel, profitable bettors on the app are taking the over at 47.5 and 48.5. So I wouldn't be surprised to see this total get back up to 48, 48.5 before kick. All right, national championship, Miami against Indiana. Let's get into it, and let's start with some trends that don't mean anything, but they're fun. So favorites, 17 and 10 since 1998 in the national championship, just 14 and 13 against the spread. So pretty back and forth here in terms of favorites and underdogs. Recently, though, it's been all favorites, 6 in a row. Last 6 national championships, the favorites have won and covered. So 6-0 against the spread if you've been betting favorites in the last 6 natties. Totals have slightly leaned towards the over, 16 overs, 11 unders since 1998. It's been back and forth the last 4 years. This is obviously Indiana's first ever trip to the national championship. Miami hasn't been here since they were here back-to-back years, 01, 02, 02, 03. Their most recent trip was the loss against Ohio State, which is one of the craziest college football games of all time, went to overtime. This game is being played at Hard Rock, so essentially a home game for Miami. But the thing is, Indiana fans have traveled extremely well during these playoffs. I'm sure there's a ton of them down there. And also, Fernando Mendoza, it's his hometown. He's from Miami. So I would imagine there's a large chunk of Indiana fans or people rooting for Indiana in the city. Their guy is the quarterback. Their guy is playing quarterback in the national championship. So even though the game's in Miami, I'm not expecting it to be a huge... I don't know. That's speculation. I would imagine there's going to be a lot of people there rooting for Indiana. Mario Cristobal, the first Cuban-American head coach in college football history, and Fernando Mendoza is the first Cuban-American player to win the Heisman Trophy. There's a fun fact for you. Anyway, let's get into the matchup. We'll start with the Miami offense against the Indiana defense. So is Miami able to move the ball on the Hoosier defense here? On the season, Miami's offense 19th in success rate, 31st in PPA per play. The Indiana defense 6th and 7th. Obviously, the first 2 playoff games we saw from Indiana were pretty dominant. In their first 2 games against Alabama and Oregon, they held teams to 12.5 points per game, under 4.8 yards per play, 34.2% success rate. We know what Miami's going to do. Let's get right into it. We know what Miami wants to do. We know what Cristobal wants to do. They want to run the ball. They want to use that huge offensive line, hand the ball off to Fletcher over and over and over again until your defense finally breaks. It's kind of what we've seen for Miami in the first 3 rounds against Texas A&M, Ohio State, and Ole Miss. 173 rush yards per game, 4.47 yards per carry, 37% success rate per rush. So Miami was able to run the ball successfully on all 3 of those teams, and we kind of saw the same sort of pattern here. Well, not exactly the same, but they were diligent. They kept handing it off. And remember, that Miami offensive line, they have the number 1 rated offensive line, according to Pro Football Focus. They have the number 1 rated offensive line in the country. And they just kept handing it off to Fletcher, And then in the second half, eventually the defense just breaks. That offensive line's just too big. Now, when it comes to Indiana's defense against the run, obviously it's elite. On paper, they're it's either them or Texas Tech as far as best run defenses in the country. This data point here doesn't tell us anything. The game against Alabama, first of all, they were up huge almost immediately. Second of all, Alabama can't run the ball on anybody. They held Alabama to 1.35 yards per carry. That doesn't tell us anything because Auburn, Georgia, and Oklahoma all shut down Alabama on the ground. They couldn't run the ball on anybody. So this data point here doesn't really tell us anything about Indiana's run defense, which brings us to the Oregon game. So watching this game, I thought Oregon was running the ball early. Now, the eye test can sometimes be deceiving. So my eye test was I could have sworn Oregon was having some success running the ball. So I looked into it to see if the numbers matched the eye test. And in the first half, Oregon, 13 carries, 43 yards. So that's just 3.31 yards per carry. 53.85% success rate per rush. So my eye test didn't deceive me here. Oregon early was handing the ball off 3 yards, 4 yards, 6 yards, 4 yards. They were successfully running the ball on Indiana in the first half. Remember, in this game, Oregon was missing their top 2 running backs. Their 2-star running backs were both out. The main guy getting the carries in this game for Oregon, well, it was him and Dare Hill, was Jay Harris. And if I'm not mistaken, correct me if I'm wrong, Jay Harris entered the transfer portal and wasn't even going to play in the game. And then with the injuries, last minute, he was like, okay, I'll play. I didn't realize. So he was one of the main backs. He was the main guy getting carries there. I don't even think he was expected to play in the game because he entered the portal. So that was the running back situation for Oregon in that one. And still in the first half, they were handing the ball off and successfully running the ball on Indiana. Now, what else happened in the first half? Well, we saw a pick 6 on the very first play of the game. We saw Dante Moore fumble the ball on his own 3, and then we saw Dante Moore fumble the ball on his own 19. Gifted Indiana 21 points. So early in that game, obviously we saw craziness. We saw Indiana being gifted touchdowns from Oregon. So early in that game, Oregon was running the ball. And if you take away those 21 gifted points, and I'm not saying we erase those plays. Clearly, Indiana's got playmakers on defense. But if you take out those plays and just look at the drives, were these teams able to move the ball? Touchdown, touchdown, punt, 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 touchdown, missed field goal. That's how the first half went without the crazy 21 gifted points. Oregon was handing the ball off. They were running the ball successfully. They just kept gifting Indiana touchdowns. And if you just look at these drives here, it doesn't look that bad. It doesn't look like a blowout. Touchdown, touchdown, punt, 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 Indiana touchdown, and then Oregon missed the field goal at the end of the half. If you just look at these drives without those 3 crazy plays, it doesn't really look like a blowout. You want to know what the score was at halftime after these drives? 35-7. So I really don't know what that game looks like if Oregon's able to keep running the ball in the second half, if the game was within reach. They were down 4 touchdowns. Running the ball wasn't an option. I also don't know what this game looks like if they had their 2 superstar running backs. They have 2 superstar running backs. They were both out. So I'm not discrediting Indiana for this game. Like those plays, they deserve those defensive touchdowns and all that. Well, actually, one of them, Dante Moore, hit the ball off his own player. The point I'm making here is I truly believe Oregon could have ran the ball in the second half on Indiana if that was an option, and also if they had their 2 superstar running backs in the game. Obviously, that wasn't an option. We're talking about Miami. This offensive line, it's absolutely huge. And by the way, their running back, Mark Fletcher, he's Derrick Henry. Well, Derrick Henry was about 240 at Alabama. He's 6'2", 225. But the same idea. They just keep handing the ball to this guy, and you have to tackle him for the entire 4 quarters, and teams eventually break. Dan Lanning at Oregon, they were missing their 2-star running backs. He kept dropping Dante Moore back to pass, gifting them points. I very seriously doubt Cristobal is going to abandon the run here. That's not what we've seen from Miami so far in the playoffs. They are very diligent about sticking to the run, and it's been successful in all 3 playoff games. First round, they played Texas A&M. We did not see a ton of offense in that game. A 20 to 20 mile per hour wind certainly has something to do with this. On the road in Kyle Field, it's 3-3, 4 minutes to go, and eventually Texas A&M's defense just can't hold against that offensive line, against Fletcher. 6 plays, 86 yards. Fletcher ripped off, I think, like a 54-yard run. Then he immediately followed that up with another 12, 13-yard run. touchdown. Game's 10-3 with 1:35 to go. Next game, Ohio State. Remember, Sagan gave them a pick six early. Miami jumped out to an early 14-0 lead. In the second half, Ohio State scored twice. Miami gets the ball back, 5:56 to go, up 17-14. What happens? Ohio State's defense just broke. They couldn't hold it anymore. 10 plays, 70 yards, over 5 minutes eaten off the clock. 24-14 Miami game. Eventually, these defenses are going to break. This offensive line is too huge. Ole Miss, we actually saw it twice in the Ole Miss game. 7 minutes to go. They get the ball down 19-17. 4 plays, 75 yards. There was a couple big plays there. That was the Malachi Toney touchdown. After they give the ball back, it's 24-19. And then Trinidad Chambliss is magical. 27-24 Ole Miss. 15 plays, 75 yards to win the game. Well, 49 seconds left, but to essentially put them in a position to win the game. And if you're thinking, oh, well, Kyle, the Indiana defense won't break. They're too good. I hear you, but look at the size difference here on the line of scrimmage. This is actually crazy. So there's a 253-pound difference here between Indiana's defensive front five and Miami's offensive line. An average of 50 pounds per person. The size difference is massive. And look, Indiana's had these huge leads. They haven't had to deal with the run in the second half these last couple of games. Miami is not going to abandon the run. That offensive line is the #1 rated offensive line in the country, and they're massive. There's a huge size advantage here for Miami against Indiana's defensive front. And again, if you're thinking, Kyle, that won't happen to Indiana, though. Well, we kind of did see it happen back in Week 11 against Penn State. Another physical rushing attack, another big offensive line. Penn State, 45.6% success rate, 5.25 yards per play in the game. And what happened in the fourth quarter? Indiana was up 20-10. Penn State, 85-yard touchdown drive. And then there was actually a Mendoza interception in there, and then a 44-yard touchdown drive. So we saw a big offensive line wear Indiana's defensive front down. They've been dominating in so many of these games. We haven't seen them play a close game against a good team in a while since the Big Ten championship game. The last two were blowouts. But we've seen a big physical blue chip offensive line wear this defensive front down. And if you're thinking, oh, well, what about the Big Ten championship game? The Indiana defense held strong late. They held off Ohio State. Well, yes, they did. They did generate technically one stop to win that game. They were up 13-10 in the fourth quarter. But let's not misremember how that game went. Ohio State went 12 plays, 70 yards, then turned it over on downs. Then they went 15 plays, 81 yards, and missed a field goal. So it's not like, Ohio State's offense was just shut down there late in the game. That 3-play, 47 yards, that was the end of regulation. It was only like 16 seconds or something. So that was Hail Mary situation there. Now, it's not that Indiana's defensive front has gotten worn down at the end of every single close game. That's not accurate. In fact, they made a huge stop in the Iowa game to win that one. Also, the first Oregon game, well, Dante Moore threw back-to-back interceptions in the first Oregon game, so they didn't really make a stop there. They just forced 2 turnovers, which is also huge. Not trying to discredit the Indiana defense. I'm just saying we know what Miami's going to do. They're going to wear you down and keep handing it off. And this Indiana defense is great. They're small, and Miami's offensive line is massive. Now, as far as Carson Beck goes, I expect to see the same type of role we've seen throughout the playoffs. He's assumed the game manager role. They want to run the ball. They want to play defense. He gets the ball out quickly. Miami is going to be without their tight end, Elijah Lofton. I don't know if he's definitely confirmed out, but it looks like Miami's going to be missing their tight end. He only had 23 catches for 218 yards on the year, but it is their starting tight end. So Miami's missing a tight end. But remember, Indiana's missing 2 of their top 3 edge rushers. Stephen Daly out for the season, Kellen Wyatt out for the season. Stephen Daly got injured after the Big Ten championship game against Ohio State. So Indiana missing a couple pieces on the defensive line there. So overall, do I expect Miami's offense to move the ball fluently on Indiana's defense? Absolutely not. But I do think the size advantage on the offensive line is something you need to take note of. And it also plays in perfectly to how Cristobal has coached these games. He's going to hand the ball off to Fletcher, run it. And his goal is going to be wear that small Indiana defensive front down. And if Miami gets the ball in the fourth quarter, I would imagine they're able to run it at that point in the game, like we've seen in all 3 games so far for Miami in the playoffs. Anyway, let's get to the other side of the ball. We got Fernando Mendoza against the Miami defense. So can Miami slow these guys down? On the season, Indiana 2nd in success rate, 2nd in PPA per play. Miami's defense 13th and 11th. Injury updates on this side. All right, so Miami, good news first. Their edge rusher, Mesidor, he's good to go. He had an elbow injury or something. He's completely good to go, practicing without limitation. Same goes for their defensive tackle, Moten. He was questionable heading into the Ole Miss game. He ended up playing. He's not even limited in practice, so he's good to go. Cornerback O.J. Frederick, more good news. He only played 5 snaps in the Ole Miss game. He was questionable heading into that game. He ended up only playing 5 snaps. He's good to go. I'm reading no limitation there, so they got Frederick. Now, cornerback Xavier Lewis is suspended for the first half for the targeting. I don't know how college football hasn't addressed that. I'm not saying take the targeting rule out. Nobody likes the targeting rule, but I understand why it's there. There's lawsuits and CTE. I get why the rule's there. You do not need to suspend players or kick them out of the game unless it's violent. If somebody gets kicked out of a playoff game or suspended for the first half of a national championship game, could be the biggest game of their lives, they better have done something violent, like an intent to injure. I can't believe they haven't fixed that yet. But, yeah, so cornerback Xavier Lewis is suspended for the first half. As far as Damari Brown, that's another one of their corners. He's listed as questionable, so I'm not sure if they're getting him back. He hasn't played the entire playoffs. He got injured in the Week 14 game against Pittsburgh. So, as a whole, Miami's defense is in good shape. They're missing a corner for the first half. That's about it. Now, Fernando Mendoza, first 2 rounds of the playoffs, he was essentially perfect. And I'm talking about a 149.6 passer rating. We didn't really get a ton of data here. He was gifted a huge lead almost immediately. He dropped back to pass. We saw 16 and 20 pass attempts. That's it in these 2 games. But in those pass attempts, he was perfect. A 149.6 passer rating, 152.9 passer rating from a clean pocket. So Mendoza looks good. It's tough to envision him struggling after what we've just seen the last 2 games. But quarterbacks have not had success throwing the ball in this Miami defense. I mean, Marcel Reed, electric season. He didn't do much of anything. Pretty much his worst game of the year. That or Texas were his 2 worst games of the year. Just a 58 passer rating against Miami. Julian saying by far his worst game of the year. By far his worst game of the year. And I'm talking about his passer rating, by the way. And that includes the Indiana game. 74-3 passer rating against Miami. He was pressured on over 42% of his dropbacks, 14.6 passer rating under pressure. Trinidad Chambliss, this is the worst game we've seen him play since we first learned who he was earlier in the season. Just an 87.2 passer rating for Trinidad Chambliss. He was pressured on over 40% of his dropbacks. So I know Mendoza has looked awesome the last couple of games. The idea of a quarterback just piecing up Miami's defense, that's almost unfathomable. That's not what we're seeing. This is one of the best pass rushers we've seen in college football for several years. And by the way, I feel like the last 2 games for Indiana kind of give us a clouded view of what their season looked like before this. If you remember, if you look at their big games, obviously they 2 blowouts against Oregon and Alabama. But if you rewind back to their season and look at their big games, that's Oregon, Iowa, Penn State, and then the Big Ten championship game against Ohio State, they weren't blowing teams out. Fernando Mendoza wasn't putting up video game numbers. He had an 88.5 passer rating in those games. He was pressured on over 44% of his dropbacks in those games. So the last 2 games kind of have us feeling like, oh, Indiana just blows everybody out. Well, yeah, they blow out bad teams, and they did just win via 2 blowouts in the first 2 rounds of the playoffs. They were gifted a lot of points via turnovers. If you actually look at their season and isolate it to just their big games, they weren't blowing teams out at all. Mendoza was actually struggling. I'm not implying that Mendoza is definitely going to struggle. I'm just saying the idea of Mendoza struggling shouldn't be mind-blowing. The last 2 games, they were up 28-7 almost immediately in these games. So it's a little bit of a different situation. We have seen Mendoza struggle in the big games throughout the year. I will say, though, looking at this graphic, I can say Mendoza has struggled in the big games, and that's true. 88.5 passer rating. Want to know what's true about all 4 of those games? Mendoza orchestrated a game-winning touchdown drive in all 4. All 4 games, Mendoza got the ball down the field, got the ball in the end zone to win. So even though just because he struggles doesn't mean Indiana's out of it. You give this guy a chance. He's got the clutch gene. Miami will definitely be the best pass rush he's seen all year. Like I said, this is one of the best pass rushes we've seen in a while. Ruben Bain Jr. and Mesidor are the 2 edge rushers. Ruben Bain's going to be a top 10 pick in the NFL draft. Mesidor has a chance of being a first-round pick himself. So Miami's got 2 first-round pick type talents at edge rusher. one of the best pass rushers we've seen in a while. In terms of run support, I wouldn't be surprised if Indiana is able to run the ball a little bit here. Now, nobody has run the ball on Miami in the playoffs. Just 3.19 yards per carry, 38% success rate per rush, 85 rush yards per game. But the way Indiana's been running the ball, it's actually pretty similar to Miami. They're diligent about it. They stick with it. Over 172 rush yards per game, 4.18 yards per carry, 36.5% success rate per rush. Kind of similar to Miami. It doesn't always look dominant, but they stick with it, and eventually it does start to work. So I wouldn't be surprised if Indiana's able to move the chains on the ground in this one. As far as betting this game, I kind of already hinted at it. I think the perception of Indiana is a little bit off due to the last two games we just saw. If you look at their four biggest games throughout the season, before the two playoff games we just saw, man, they were losing or tied. They were tied with Iowa with 2 minutes left. They were tied with Oregon with 7 minutes left. They were losing to Penn State with a minute 50 left, and they actually scored to take the lead over Ohio State. It was 10-6 in the third quarter. So I feel like the last two games are kind of skewing our vision of what this Indiana team was this year. They weren't blowing the good teams out. They just blew two teams out. They were gifted a bunch of points earlier in the game from turnovers, and I'm not saying they don't deserve credit for that. In fact, I do think we need to maybe consider that Indiana is playing at a higher level right now than they were early in the season, and I think that has some merit. But the way Cristobal coaches, Miami runs the ball, I very seriously doubt they're going to gift Indiana 3 touchdowns in the first half, the way that Oregon and Alabama were doing. So, look, and another thing, I want to be clear. Sports are not transitive. You can't do this. You can't say, hey, Team A played Team B, Team C played Team B, so Team A versus Team. You can't do that. But we do have a similar data point here. Both of these teams just recently played Ohio State on a neutral field. It's pretty even in terms of both of these offenses against Ohio State. Indiana averaged 5.96 yards per play, 38.3% success rate. Miami 5.22, 42.2%. So pretty much even here offensively. Miami scored 31 points to 13, but in terms of efficiently moving the ball, pretty even on this side of the ball. And on the other side of the ball, if you look at Ohio State's offensive numbers against these two defenses, it's pretty much the same. I mean, pretty similar. So based on their recent data points against Ohio State, both were on neutral fields, you would say these two teams are about even. Obviously, sports are not transitive. You can't do that. But I don't know how we're saying, in my opinion, the fact that Dante Moore gifted Indiana 21 points and Alabama gifted them, they give them 17 points early in that game, is skewing this number. I think Miami looks as dominant as anybody right now. I do not want to fade Miami, especially with a small defensive line, the specific way they're playing, hand the ball off and just bully teams, and eventually they're going to give. I don't want to fade that with a small defensive line. I'm on Miami in this one. I'm going down with the Canes. I've bet Miami in every single round so far in the playoffs. Not bailing now. I got the money line too. I got plus the points, and I'm on the money line. Let's do it. Miami up. You. Thanks for watching. Thanks for this season. Thanks for the continued support. Let's have ourselves a great game. Please remember to bet responsibly. Live shows at midnight Eastern time as always. Yeah, enjoy your natty.